everyone to the October meeting of Life Planning Network. No further ado, we're going to go right ahead with the program. And we are so pleased as the Life Planning Network to welcome Anita Holt. So Anita, wave so everybody can see you up there in the gallery, to our LPN family. Anita moved to North Carolina back in 2011 from Boston. So she's a New England gal, but she's got roots all over the country. A foray in the Bay Area. So all of you here from San Francisco, she was out there, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. So she's got roots. She's actually a Pittsburgh gal, and that's where her family still is. She joined the Forest at Duke back in 2015 as president CEO, where she still is. This is a seasoned professional in the field of aging services with 30 years of executive leadership in continuing care and senior living communities. In the course of those years and the decades, Anita's worked primarily in faith-based systems and denominationally related communities. She's an advocate of innovation. She's steeped in strategic service alignment, program development, and she also responds to all the emerging needs of older adults as they come up on a daily basis. Anita serves also on several boards throughout North Carolina, especially with Boys and Girls Clubs. She also serves with the Center for Child and Family Health Board. As I mentioned, her family still is in Pittsburgh, so I didn't realize, Anita, you go there every several weeks. Yeah. I was thinking of once a year, but she's there every several weeks. Anita has educational background up in Boston with a Master of Public Health from Boston University and is a proud alum of Northeastern University. So with no further ado, and Anita, welcome.
Well, thank you. One of the things that, people are dealing with now is Zoom fatigue all over the place. Yesterday, I had 4 meetings. I started at 7 o'clock. I finished at 3:30, and I was on Zoom except for 15 minutes. But the most fun I had is I had to sneak into a resident happy hour on Zoom, which is a unique experience. But the best part of that is somebody, of course, said, and I usually sneak in and sneak off just to say hi and then go on my merry way. But one of the residents saw me and said, I got her now. And so he was just letting loose with what his current issue of the day was. And another resident looked down at him and looked down just like the old Hollywood squares and said, "So, Jim, get over it. Get a bigger drink." Anyway, our residents are getting used to Zoom. They're finding ways to manage. And yes, it does look like Hollywood squares. I wasn't sure exactly who comprised the group that I would be talking to. Joyce and I have talked many a time. And I can see that you're all over the place, and then I find out that you're accomplished writers and authors and all kinds of good professional things that you have done. And okay, so I'm a little nervous, but what I'm here to talk to you about is continuing care retirement communities, because I'm having the time of my life in this job. I came to the Forest at Duke having worked pretty much in many places for different organizations, big ones, small ones, standalone, and to come to a community that wasn't broke, that didn't have to be turned around, that had full occupancy, was amazing. What a delight, because you could think outside of crisis. That meant that I was happy and skating and going like, I get to do what I know in a place that's ready for me to do it. And then we have this little darling called COVID. Nobody told me that once you got good at something, you'd have to reinvent it. And our entire industry is really kind of struggling with figuring out how do we continue not only with COVID, but post-COVID. And we are not an industry that changes easily and quickly. You'll hear me speak a little bit later about sacred cows, and I'll tell you how we've been tipping some of those lately. But one of the things is that 2020 was certainly not the year that we expected. People who are seasoned and not new to the industry kind of approach each year. You've got your plan, you know what you're doing, you know who you're serving, you have a plan, you have a process, you've got your right people, you kind of keep going. And depending on where you were in the country, in the first 3 months of COVID, despite the challenge and the horror of it, it was also interesting, challenging, focused. It was engaging. It called on you to be better than you thought you could be, to respond more agilely than you thought you could. It was new and different, but we felt as communities, we were certainly ready to serve older adults. We could get through this because we knew how to manage stuff. And everybody pulled that big honking binder off the shelf, the one that says Emergency Preparedness Plan. And it's big and it's got everything you need to do in it. And you shuffled services and you shuffled staff, and we were on target. And the most amazing thing is, we can all remember saying sometime in June, well, in September, when we get back to normal. And then we really realized that we were in this for the long haul, that what we were doing that was different, the things we thought we could sustain in the short term, might have to be sustainable over the long term. And that was just at the point where we were also figuring out how to homeschool kids, not visit family, not go on vacation. The man that I loved lives in the house and is there every day. I had counted on him traveling. What is going on? And so our personal lives and our work lives all kind of meshed into this thing that was nothing like we were doing. And for our residents, indeed, the reasons they fell in love with our community, whether it was the engagement, both internal and external, the friendships, the socialization, the educational opportunities, all the things that all the brochures and the ads and the everything say, we weren't doing because we couldn't visit. They couldn't cross visit. We couldn't do communal meals. Our health center visitation was shut down. Um, and how people live became very different and very isolated, even in community and in a place that prides itself on community. And yet we still had to be there. And I would say that at this point, if we're really looking at our residents and our staff, and we recognize that people are worn out and trying to find the right ways to energize and engage and augment and challenge, to have meaning, to have revised purpose is critical. But from an organizational standpoint, the one good piece of information and the good news is that this really is an opportunity. The strength of our organizations has always been that it's rooted in our mission and vision and our commitment to serve, whether that's faith based or not. But the senior living industry is really poised to reinvent itself, to redefine and drive change and value for who we serve now and for those we want to serve in the future. I was looking at some data in preparation and just trying to figure out, well, what has been going on, because on the business side of things, our industry has been stable. The housing market has continued to be strong. In Durham, it's one of the highest and hottest housing markets. Things go on the market for a day and a half. And what people are paying for the smallest of things is absolutely amazing. None of us build retirement communities in places where people don't want to be. So we have that demographic and geographic favorability. People like being here. Um, we offer a mix of services, some of which are desire based. You could live without, but that's not what you want, and others which are need based. But we're not totally dependent on need as an opportunity to stay in business. And financially, we were not harmed by the virus, by the shutdown, etc., because our fees cover our operating costs. That meant we were able to keep our staff. We did not furlough staff. We did not lay off. Most of my peers did not do that either. So, from an economic standpoint, it kind of looked the same, but it certainly didn't feel the same in operation. One of the things that's increasingly important, and there's a group of us CEOs in the North Carolina area who really realize that who survives well and who is positioned well in the future are those that don't take comfort in how surprisingly reasonable it's been to operate now and just stand still saying, hey, we're going to ride this out. That is not how it's going to be, because I do believe that what people want is decidedly different now. And how we operate and the service changes we've made are going to increasingly be required to be different. As an organization and an industry, we certainly have to be aware of and not complacent about changes in the housing market. That is the one interruption that will change our occupancy most quickly. If houses aren't moving, people aren't moving, and they're making decisions or different decisions about living in our community. So if that is a change, we certainly need to look at different ways to finance the options. The post-acute pipeline. What's happening in hospitals? Who do they keep? How do they keep? How do they do post-acute care? And are we in partnership with those that can feed as serve as a pipeline to our communities, particularly on the healthcare side? Reimbursement, as every conversation changes, is going to be challenged, whether it's reimbursement for the healthcare that we deliver or the expenses that others begin to absorb. So looking at that market, being able to partner appropriately to gain scale or advantage for the people we serve will be important. Before the pandemic, we were dealing with workforce availability. The fact that we were having difficulty and will continue to have difficulty finding people to work in our communities. We need to continue the work that's done there. Just because people are unemployed and looking does not mean that we do not have a duty to make sure that we are paying a living wage, that people are benefited, that there is safety and security, that we are creating vibrant, valuable workplaces for people to work. If you can't do that, they're not coming. And if you do get them, they're not staying. And what you don't want is to be the job or the organization where it is the job of last resort. We ask people to be tremendously caring. We ask people to care for people sometimes on their worst day. These people deserve to be paid and to be paid well and to recognize if I don't show up to work, life will go on as lovely as it always should. If my certified nursing assistants, if my dishwasher doesn't show up, I'm out of business. And we need to respect that in the industry. And if we go forward in a tight marketplace, we have to create the kind of opportunities that allow people to have a gracious life, that allow them to feel valued, and to pay for the service we expect. And then we need to look as an organization. There's a tendency in senior housing and particularly in CCRCs, well, we need to do every service we provide. We need to run the home health care agency, the dining services, the community engagement, transportation. We need to run everything. Well, you know what? Maybe you don't. Maybe what you need to do as an industry is look at how can we create a reasonable relationships and partnerships with providers that create advantages for our residents and for our community. Leverage what we're good at to get more of what we need with partners who are excellent. And then you start to have a different conversation. That brings me to the part that I always find interesting, which is the notion of how do you become an agile responder? Our industry is not known for its agility. The joke in the building part of it is if you go to the newest CCRC, it was built on the plan that was bought by the Baptists, developed by the Methodists, sold to the Episcopalians, who then decided to build it as a non-denominational retirement community. And part of that is we take so long to make decisions. Consensus is lovely. Bringing people on board is great. But I would venture to say that there's a level of agility about business that we would be well served to incorporate in how we make decisions and how we are able to say yes or no. And that we never, or we certainly work very hard to not follow that shiny penny down the drain. And we can do that because somebody falls in love with the project, it's their baby, and we're going to do it no matter what. And then we have this program that never quite delivered on what people expected, and nobody had an exit strategy. So for our industry, one of the most important things will be how are we agile responders to the environment? Can we say yes? Can we say no? And how can we let it go when it doesn't work? One of the things that's also happening is, and I just did something terrible. I put my page right out of alignment, and this is not the paragraph I'm talking about. Um, it may be time to look at our sacred cows, which I mentioned earlier, and go for some good old fashioned cow tipping. One of the things that's good about that is, as one of my staff said, you're just going to do anything in the COVID. And I said, well, no, that's not what we're trying to do. But it is an opportunity to have conversations you may never have had because it was going to upset too many people. It was different. It was change. I am reminded all the time in my community, people will say, well, residents don't like change. Our residents have changed more in the ensuing 85 years than anyone we have ever known. They are adaptable. They are understanding that things do change. Nobody likes to be out of their comfort zone, but the ability to adapt to change, I would bet any resident against any 20-year-old any day. And that's because we do have the ability to move through, adapt, and develop. One of the things that is important and is to look at disruption is not a bad thing. It's just disruption. It's what you do with it and how you pull it apart as an industry. I was looking at some statistics, and according to Baker Tilly, which is an accounting firm, a national accounting firm, is that occupancy trends in senior living have been going down. Now, certainly in the past year, that makes sense. Assisted living on national average is at about 87%. Independent living. Senior housing without services is at about 84. That's not affordable housing, though, which is usually at 100% plus because there's not enough. And then assisted living is at about 82%, and skilled nursing has certainly declined. And in all areas in 2020, those are sharp declines for us. But it would seem that for communities in senior living, and particularly CCRCs, that the challenge and where we are fragile would be if we are unable to think, look, or act critically at this time. It's about waiting for things to come back to normal. I don't think normal's ever going to be normal again. It does not mean we will be living in pandemic forever. It means that the changes we've made, some will be long lasting. And we'll probably get a chance to do this again in another form. Um, the notion of doing what we've always done. Can't wait to get back to normal so we can do what we used to do. I will tell you that the residents in my community and some of my neighbor communities, we've added services we will never do away with. We figured out how to do delivery of meals, 2 meals a day, hasn't changed our operating costs. We've even managed to actually have creative vegetarian meals served because we started out, people thought you could put anything on a portobello and it was a vegetarian meal. That is not the case. and But it was an investment in education and change and the end product. What you were doing for the short term has become the long term. So now that we know that, there are bundled services in communities that people are used to having. And yet we found out when we weren't going in people's homes to provide all of these services, who wanted them, who didn't, who needed them. So flexibility and the ability to choose what you want is something we're probably not going to roll back on. So then creating, again, different kinds of service, different levels of access becomes important. Um, People will laugh and say, well, those are just small things, but they impact how do you staff? Um, as our joke is, where is it written that one may only have a housekeeper Monday through Friday between the hours of 7 a.m. and 4:30? And does it have to happen every week? Or can it be a rotation if one wants it? Where is it written that I can, if I want to eat 60 meals in 30 days, if I want to eat 30 meals in 10 days? Doesn't matter. It's the same amount of meals we're cooking anyway. Make it easy. Give people choice. Um, because it really does level out. The person who's there to eat every time you're open for every meal against the person who says, I only eat salad for dinner. Eventually, it weighs itself out. Um, those are the small things, the close to the bone things, the things that serve residents. But as an industry and an organization, the opportunities that are in front of us are to look at growth and expansion. And it's not growth for growth's sake. It's really the idea of, do you serve people in other locales, and how do you serve them? How do you leverage your infrastructure? If you target new markets, what happens if they're off campus? Is it a continuing care without walls? Because there is that group that wants to stay at home. They're on your wait list. Their names are there. And every time their children ask, where are you going? We're going to the Forest of Youth, they say, and they laugh. They're not coming, but their name is on the list and nobody needs to ask. The idea is, what if you serve them in their own home and they have access to health care when and as they need it? So that people are making more of a choice in that mix. And again, the notion of every expansion you do needn't necessarily be yours. Some communities are really good at building, some communities are not. Our community is really good at the coordination of services, leveraging partner relationships, and doing those kinds of things. So I should never volunteer us to build the next blah, 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 wherever. But what I should say is, you need a service coordinator, you need a program, you need transportation, you need food. I've got that. And that's how we work together. And maybe that's how you start to serve people besides just the people who can afford your community. You can create a market rate product. You could partner with another not for profit, leverage your services as social accountability, and maybe help develop affordable housing. Again, it's about relevance across the continuum, not just of age or health, but of economics. If CCRCs want to be leaders in serving older adults, we are going to have to diversify our market. And there are ways to leverage our expertise and serve a broader base. Now, you can't serve everybody, and you can't serve everybody simultaneously. But the opportunity is to think about, what's our opportunity to be better as a partner, a community, a neighbor, and a resource. Reinvention is kind of fun. We have this wonderful thing, and most of the communities here have meal credits. Now, we call them credits, residents call them dollars, and they have to spend their dollars in the month or quarter that they are given, no matter what. It allows people to eat whatever they want whenever they want. Well, what happens at the end of the quarter when you have left, you have people saying, so I need 16 pieces of pie, 4 cartons of milk, 2 things of salmon because I'm using up my credits and it goes in the freezer. That was never what it was intended to be. I trust me, in every community in America, that's what it is. You say credits, residents say dollars, and everybody has to spend them up. My feeling is, you know what? We haven't charged residents for any credits for a meal for the past 9 months. Our food costs are the same. They're getting lunch and dinner. They're getting a variety, the same variety. I did not change any purchasing requirements. It occurs to me that we have created our own albatross, and let it go. It's only food. And so that's something we're looking at. And when we talk about it to residents, they said, well, how can you do that? You won't know what we ate. And I said, I don't care. We have the food. We have the people. We'll make it work. Um, Fully unbundled services. There's this idea that you moved into a community and and look at what we give you. Well, what if you don't want it? People were clutching their pearls when John Erickson and Erickson Community said we're going to unbundle everything. Well, the reality is people bought not only what they wanted, they bought more of what they wanted because it was their choice. And I would say, again, that's an opportunity that we who have always done it that way might have to change. And then the notion of bringing the outside community in, the worst thing we could be for longevity and sustainability is folks behind a closed gate. We need to have people in our communities leveraging our resources as a community service. You don't want to become the teen center, but there is a needle you can thread in terms of relevance in the community. The other part of that is our residents making it easy for people who all their lives have been engaged in larger community, but this might be their new community, to be a part of our larger geographic community in ways that are meaningful, so that the relationship is beyond the place where to go, but a vibrant part of your existing community. How you define that and do that. Um, People have always talked about the hospitality model as something one must do in concierge service, and I'm torn. Hospitality is great, but we're not a hotel, because in a hotel you can go, you come, you visit, you go, you leave, we don't see you again. Everything we do, we get to repeat again and again and again because people aren't leaving. So you want to think carefully about what you do and how you do it. But what you do want to pay attention to as we go forward is not everybody wants to get in that big old bus that says the Forested Duke or it says old folks arriving at the symphony. All right. I've got residents who say it's date night. We want to go to Mateo's for dinner. We want to be dropped off at DPAC, and could you pick us up? And the four of them are going together. I've got other folks who want to do something and say, hey, can you get us over to Greensboro, which is an hour and a half away, because there's something new at the museum there and we want to go see that. And it's just two of them. It's not 30. And I think as we go forward, we're going to have to learn how to respond to the individual, the small group, because not everything has to be a bus trip. And then lifestyle and integrated care models. We are so good at healthcare, but sometimes that says then that aging is diminishing in health. And that's not the case in many instances. And some of the things that we need to do is look at, how do you look at integrated healthcare? Alternative healthcare? What are the centers for integrated living at Duke, where your care team can be your acupuncturist, your yoga, your spa, your everything else. It's herbal medicine, it's naturalism, whatever. How do you create that? And what happens when you say, hey, welcome to the Forest at Duke. By the way, for your first year here, we bought you a membership to Duke Integrative Medicine. Have a great time. Find out if it's for you. Make new friends, do whatever. Because your life shouldn't be defined by your real estate. And communities that support that will be successful. And certainly the last part of that is innovative care models in healthcare, which we do provide. And I say that because we not only think about how do we work with hospitals and care providers and others, how do we use technology? How do we sign up to be the partner that pilots something? Initiate the conversations that allow you to be front and present about defining the new things in aging. That's a very different dynamic than keeping the apartments full, the health center at the right occupancy, and having a no deficiency survey. I do all of those things. I would be bored to death if that's the scope of the job. But the challenge of redefining who we are, being a partner, saying what if is important. I came here 6 years ago to a staff that had been here, most of them for a long time. The leadership had been here almost 17 years. And every answer came from this office. And when you're a new community in the beginning, that's probably just right, because you might be the only person who knows what's supposed to happen. But 17 years later, we had folks that they didn't want to break anything. The routine was there. And they came to know that on those trips to Pittsburgh, I tend to be locked into NPR. And they came and they kept saying, "You really, are you going home again?" I'm like, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Well, because every time you come back, you got something from that NPR that we're supposed to look at doing." And, it kind of became an ongoing joke. I assume they were joking, let's put it that way. But one of the things that did come up, and I share this for how you can throw flaky at the wall and make it work. I listened to this news report about a company in Sweden, so we're already way out there. It's homogeneous, it's a different country, everything else. But they decided that people were missing deadlines, they weren't happy, they didn't have retention, and people were working at deadlines, they were just working, 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 working. They decided, okay, we're going to stop that. You're going to keep making the same amount of money you make now, but you're going to work 6 hours a day. We're not doing lunch. We're not doing the 15-minute break or you got 6 hours. And then you go home, do whatever else you want to do. The productivity for that company, it was budget neutral, went through the roof. They they met and exceeded all deadlines. Their retention, absolutely there. When I said, what if we did that with housekeeping? Because I watched housekeeping. They came in at 7:30 and they got the cart. Then they wheeled it to the break room and they got their breakfast. Then they wheeled it out because it wasn't time to go to a resident apartment to clean. And then they went slowly through the campus and cleaned the apartments. Oh, and then they were there an hour and it was time for break. And they wheeled the carts back and put them away. And it went on ad infinitum. But 10 of 4, when their day was over, their day was over at 4, and at 10 of 4, those carts were back and put away, and everybody was standing there looking at the time clock. And I said, well, clearly we don't have 8.5 hours worth of work for people. But the other point of that is, where is it written that, one, you must eat in tandem, break in tandem, etc.? And why are they vacuuming my office in the middle of a meeting? So I raised this to my leadership team. I'd been there about a year. They said, okay, there she goes, that crazy woman, something from the radio she wants us to do. It took 5 years. I just kept dropping it back out there. But I am pleased to tell you that flaky sometimes happens, because we just started piloting our housekeeping team as a self-directed team, because I can't afford to pay everybody $15 an hour. But if you're only working 6 hours and you get what you used to get, you are now making $17 an hour. And you work 6, and it's somebody works all by their lonesome from 6 to 12, 15, and they're out of there. I have housekeepers that come in at 9 and they leave at 3:30, and they see their kids off in the morning and they're seeing them in the afternoon. My call outs, my sick days, even in the time of Zoom, are going down. I have satisfaction. I know that I'm paying at least the beginning of a living wage. And I think we have the opportunity to keep testing and trying. So I encourage in our industry, throw it against the wall. Call it a pilot, no one will kill you, and you can always change it and evaluate. So I think that our best days in senior living are ahead of us. Our market is changing. Our residents and the people we serve are changing. What people wanted 25 years ago has nothing to do with what people want now, not even what they wanted 5 years ago. And it's about choice, opportunity, respect what I bring to the table. I have to have meaning in my life. You don't have to give it to me because I came to you with meaning. And that is the most important thing. We don't need to set the construct to make people dependent or less than. Take a walk on the wild side, invent something different, live in a comfortable space, and I think we will serve older adults in ways that I know I want to be treated, because I've had the luxury of going from not one to one. I got my red, white, and blue card this year, so I'm in.
Bravo. That's like a collective thank you, and wow. You'd see the chat box. You haven't had a chance to even, Anita, to even look, but some people need to leave for other meetings. They're saying, tell her how wonderful she is. This is great. So I'm sure there are questions. So just unmute yourselves and let's just jump into an informal give and take.
Hi, Anita. That was fantastic. So my background is in gerontology, and I've looked at aging in place phenomena and all those good things. One of the questions I have for you, in light of COVID, there's been a lot of question about, the setup for senior living. In that, is it with the assumption that, at some point we'll have some other pandemic where it requires people to socially distance. So, are we looking at a completely different model where it's no longer housing people all in these one unit, but a little bit along the lines of what you're talking about, where people stay in their own homes, right? But then the question for me becomes like, how do you maintain that connectivity, that social connection that you're getting in those residences where people are all living together. So which way do you go?
I think you go all of those ways. There will always be people who choose to live in community. And I will tell you, in the 9 months since COVID first hit, I've had one resident in the health center who had a mild case and two residents in independent living in a mild case. And I have 400 residents in independent living and 92 residents in the health center. So obviously the practices and the ways in which you manage your community are important there. And yet I'm always aware that we are only one community transmission away from having something happen. I think that the way you manage, and it's not an unusual model throughout the country, is what I call continuing care without walls. That's what some of the programs are. In North Carolina, we call them early acceptance program because that's what the legislation lets us call it, although it looks a lot like continuing care without walls. And it means that you create a virtual community. One of the programs that's really big is now called Envisage, but it was Longwood at Home in Pittsburgh. There's Friends Continuing Care in Philadelphia. There's a big one, Cadbury in New Jersey. And basically, for an entrance fee, you do case coordination, care management. But you also, when you're really doing it right, you're creating a virtual community. So you're getting people together, you're providing education. You may lock into a particular community as a resource, but there are all kinds of ways. People forget that continuing care is an insurance product. And so it's a risk product, the building, the service, etc. So where you live, it's still covering for your risk and making sure that you're able to provide the care and services for, as promised, when one needs them throughout the continuum. So I think areas we just are launching our early acceptance program. We'll probably start with the first caucus of about 30 people. And,
And the early acceptance, does that mean people are still living at home? Is that what it?
They
Okay.
are, but they have access to our health service. They have a membership card. They can come to the community. When there is something that's resident only, we usually pull a certain amount on. We consider them residents. And the thing that will happen is when they're ready to move on campus, if they choose to do that, they don't have to requalify. Now, if they're not independent living at the point they decide, they'll still, instead of being denied entrance because you must enter as an independent resident, they will have already qualified, so they will move to the right level of care.
So in early acceptance, they can come and get meals in
If
early
they
acceptance?
choose to, they would pay a resident rate as opposed to a guest rate.
Right.
And they can come to any of the on-site programs. They can use the gym. They can come to classes, those kinds of things.
I have a question about that. Does that model allow for people who may have lesser financial means available to them to participate in that, quote, early acceptance?
The early acceptance program is a much lower entry fee because there's no real estate attached to us. So in our program, the entrance fee is $36,000, which amortizes over 50 months at 2%, and then a monthly fee of $9.90 a month. And but I just joined. I can say with the program I designed is one that I've joined 20 years later. So I'm really excited about that. But I joined Envisage because, like most people who run communities, I can't afford to live in one. And so I paid an entry fee of $60,000, and I paid $300 a month. But I have basically long-term care insurance on steroids, and I have a case manager and a care coordinator, and this program travels. So even though I'm not living in Pennsylvania, the same services are available, and that's the one I chose. So it is an option, and it's a lesser option, but at least I know now that I'm single and I don't have children, and so I wanted to make sure, one is I don't want my sister to make those decisions. No. And I love her, but no. And so that allowed me to know that I had that piece taken care of.
That's
Yeah.
great. Meg asks, is there a directory of early acceptance programs?
I don't know of a directory per se, but I will do this. There's one person I know that I can ask if there is, or how they've morphed over time, and I will send that to Joyce, who can then send it out.
Are you familiar with the Eden alternative, and do you apply? Yeah, oh, brilliant. And do you apply their kind of guidelines in your program?
Yes and no. I am 100% in part and in favor of how do you naturalize, we do have animals and things in our community, bringing outside in, etc. I had the opportunity when I was in California, we took a road trip and went to New York. So I went to one of the original Eden communities, and then a secondary morph of it. And I like the notion of how care is defined, and kind of nothing for us without us, so that it's very inclusive model. I actually had the heebie-jeebies from all of the animals. And it was the function of the community was beautiful, nestled in beautiful upstate New York. And it had dead plants on the inside. And so I'd rather put the glass in, open the doors so people can be outside and take in all of this natural beauty than create this artificial thing. Um, and it's not that I'm against it, it just didn't work for me. In terms
Is that the Eden alternative you're talking about?
of, it had between the greyhounds, the birds, and the macaw behind the administration desk, it was quite an experience. But the other part of that is, and the thing that grew out of that that I think is important, was the understanding of how self-determining older adults need to be in their environment, whether that's skilled care or not. And I think that philosophy really has driven the industry in the past 10 years. And even if you don't call it that, it's what everybody's striving to do. It's what got us to neighborhood models of care. It's what got greenhouse and small house and all of those things to be part of the discussion. And suddenly it became about the person and not about the double loaded corridor with the nurse running up and down the hall with the med cart. And it
That's what
came
it's
about,
about.
oh,
Yeah.
if you've never eaten breakfast all of your life, then you don't have to eat it just because the surveyor says you should. My favorite restaurant resident, the first week I worked in a nursing home, she was 90 some years old. At that point in my life, it was the oldest person I've ever seen. She weighed all of 90 pounds and she was diabetic. And every morning, all she ever wanted was toasted white bread with butter and cinnamon and sugar. And this 10-year-old dietitian came in and said, "Oh no, you're diabetic. You can't have that." And I love my good old fashioned country doctor, medical director who said, "Yes, she can. She can have a cigarette wrapped in bacon dipped in sugar if she wants, because she's not going to die from that. And if we need to change her meds, we will." So I very quietly learned from someone who maybe wasn't the most sophisticated, but taught me one of the best lessons I ever learned. It ain't gonna kill them. Change the meds.
Anita, a question that I have is, when you look at where the industry has come and where it's going, what do you see now as the most likely change in the future?
Um, I think that we are going to be, from a financial perspective, I think we're going to have to come up with some different ways to how do we build and finance and work. Our debt is monolithic and it drives our service requirements because we build with tax exempt bonds. These are very expensive communities to make. We need to learn how to leverage existing resources. You need to learn how to have a hub, and maybe 10 miles down the road, you do 20 apartments that have a service factor, et cetera. So how do we leverage our existing inventory, and how do we create opportunities to expand in different ways? Because people aren't donating land like most of the not-for-profits that have been built. And so I think that's one change. The other change is that as for-profits have gotten in the market, it's confused the market in this way. It's all senior housing. If you people don't know if they're looking at a continuing care retirement community, a rental apartment, assisted living, skilled nursing, light, um, and so the educated consumer is digging through a morass, and it's very hard to know, have you really made the best decision for yourself? And we don't do enough to create options and diversity in our own marketplace. One of the reasons I love Presbyterian Senior Care in Pennsylvania is because they have Longwooded Oakmont, which is their flagship, but they have Presbyterian Senior Care, which is how they started, which is more modest. But they also have a full inventory of affordable housing. They've been leaders in tax credit. They do PACE programming because what they decided is our role is to be a leader in aging services. It's about the people we serve, not the real estate, although they have a healthy real estate portfolio. I think that's how we'll survive, is thinking outside the box of, oh, I got to build 50 more cottages. I'm not good enough to know how we're going to change financing. But, when I sweat over buying a couch, but I didn't sweat over the $30 million in tax-free debt. And I think there's something cuckoo there.
Anita, I've got another question. This is Mary out in California. I'm wondering whether you have dealt with care coordinators, consultants in your work, and it seems to me that there's so much confusion about what the options are in communities that there's really a role for, in those communities where there aren't any, for younger people moving into this field to get familiar with the different options and to work with families around making decisions about what's the best housing and lifestyle option for themselves and for their loved ones.
Well, there are some good organizations that do that. There are also independent practitioners who are social workers, in particular, who have done and really good jobs at that. There are clinicians who do good jobs, but clinicians do tend to come from a clinical base. Um, but I think that anytime you have someone who has a well-rounded knowledge of what's available, but the best research is the research that a family or the person who's ultimately going to be the user does. You go kick the tires, you look at it, you go eat a meal, you talk to people. How does it feel? Pretty much most people do the same services. My gut feel is when I walk into a community, if nobody looks up, even the person that's the receptionist, I know we've got the beginning of a problem. But it is the idea of how does it feel to you? How resonant is it with the way you live and the way you want to live? And I would never make a decision until I kicked the tires and was really quite sure that what I was choosing fit me.
I'm a career counselor. I have clients who are looking to get into elder services, and many of them don't have a background in it. And so, I mean, these are people at sort of lower middle, and close to the top administrators, but not in the elder care field. And I'm wondering what advice you might have, both for like naming some of the new work that's, I mean, you mentioned care coordinators, which, I mean, we've heard of that before, but there seem a couple of other names for new positions that may be less familiar, certainly to the general population. I wondered if there are both names that are coming online of jobs and what might be some ways that those could be accessed by, over time by people who start off not having a background in the area.
There are some new names and new things that don't require the background, but I think one of the interesting things is how organizations are changing who they hire. When I started, you had to be a licensed nursing home administrator because if you couldn't do that, you couldn't possibly run a community. Well, that is not true. Although if you can survive running a nursing home, you can probably run anything. But the reality is My salespeople, one of my salespeople is a social worker, and the other one is a former middle school teacher. They are fabulous salespeople, some of the best I've ever had because they listen, they find out what a client wants, and they listen some more. They have sold more than any of my trained salespeople, have anywhere. My best marketer is someone who had no marketing history, but was, believe it or not, was an elementary school teacher, um, but a person with a high passion for reading and communication. And she has such an ability to tap in to how people listen and hear that it's good. I just hired a women's coach, a former women's coach for rowing at UNC, the head coach. And I just hired her as a project manager. And the reason I did is because if you can answer the university, if you can manage helicopter parents, and if you can manage over entitled young women on the crew team, you've got no problems. You can manage anything I've got to show. And she's fabulous. It's because nothing ruffles her. And she built a program out of nothing once. She's working in an industry she knows nothing about. She's learning. Her skills were transferable. I think that our industry does not do a good enough job of reaching out to get people involved and creating pathways for people to do that. We run 6 different businesses. You can do food, you can do social work, you can do finance and accounting, you can do building, you can do resource development and funds development, education and training, human resources, and of course the almighty dining. When you start to think of all of those, there are relationships we can have with different educational pieces to say what you love to do can be done here. And I think that's what we really have to work to do.
You talked about the early acceptance program. Have you run into the situation where more people want to switch to residence than you have room for? And how are you prepared for that possibility?
One of the things we do is we manage our early acceptance. So we take in 30 each year. We're willing to take in 30. We will go up to 90 people. So it just launched this year. And once we hit 90, somebody's going to have to come off the list before you can. And in order to come onto our early acceptance program, you have to be on our wait list for the community. So these are the people that maybe wouldn't be coming to your community. They say, yeah, I'm on the list, but we don't want to move for 3 or 4 years, okay? But say that in the intervening time, if you're just on the wait list, if your partner is no longer independent, you then would not be able to enter independent living, or you would be separated, or if you wanted to come as a couple. At that point, if you wanted to come to the community, we will take, because you're already a resident through early acceptance, your partner will come into assisted living or skilled care if necessary, and you can come into independent living. You won't be disqualified medically if something changes. So it's kind of an insurance blanket.
Okay, Meg, you've got the last question.
This is not one that you can probably answer, so it'll be a compliment. I think it is marvelous how open you are to change and how willing to really, can't think of the verb, get rid of sacred cows and innovate and see the bigger possibilities. And I am, of course, curious to know what about your background makes you that way, because it seems like a marvelous trait in this industry.
Well, I've been fired a lot. I think, I don't know that it's so much a trait, it's something that maybe grew over time, but I know that from early on, I kept always seeing what could be different about what we do. And I did. I always felt like I was always on the verge of big trouble, and it's like, they're like, oh, Hope, please, why can't we? This community is the place that they were so open to why can't we, and so ready that it was just fun. And I've got the most amazing team here who they are all in. And our rule is we may get it wrong, but it won't be because we didn't try. And we ask residents, we'll say we're going to start something new. It might work, it might not. Please give us grace. When you give people grace in the workplace, it is amazing what they can do because they don't have fear of failure and they don't have fear of reprimand. And my only two rules are don't kill anybody and do nothing to make those 60 minutes people show up. We're good.